In this video, I have a crack at making pattern plywood drink coasters. I have a mountain of scrap form ply strips that are all left over from my workstation build, and this makes the perfect project to use up those usually useless offcuts. I've never made pattern plywood before, so this should be an exciting new challenge. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the thin film from the surface of the form ply. Wood glue doesn't stick to this stuff, so in order for this to actually work, we're first going to need to remove that film, and I'm going to do that by using my planer. It's perfectly fine to send this through the planer as long as you take very shallow passes, and in this case I'm only going deep enough just to remove that film from the surface. Next, I rip the strips down to 15mm widths on the table saw. These coasters will be 100mm by 100mm, so I'll cut the strips into lengths of about 120mm long by setting up a stop block on the miter saw. With the strips now cut, we can glue them into horizontal panels with the plies facing up. To help support and keep the panels flat, I'm using strips of MDF that I cover in packing tape. Packing tape is a great way to stop them from sticking to the glue. With the glue now dry, we can remove them from the clamps. A few of these need just a little bit of persuasion to come apart, but that's easily achieved with the help of a putty knife. It's now back over to the table saw to put a straight edge on the panels using the crosscut sled. This is to get them ready to cut into strips again, but this time in the opposite direction that the plies face. cutting the strips in this direction, we have to be very cautious and take it slow as the ply becomes very weak at this point. Here you can see what can easily happen when the ply isn't supported. Gluing strips in the opposite direction will add strength back and allow us to create some interesting patterns to experiment with. So they've come out pretty good. They're actually very strong. Mostly because obviously we've got these cross pieces going here to strengthen it. If it was going only this way, like for example this one's a little tiny bit bendy. I don't want to break that one because I need this one, but I think what we're going to try and do now for this particular one is now cut across this way and then try and glue them up so that they look like checkerboard type pattern. But here's one I've sanded a little bit. And it kind of looks pretty funky. So we'll keep going with it, see how it turns out. We'll cut this one up now. Just like before, we have to be cautious as cutting the strips weakens them once again and they are easily susceptible to breaking. So we will take slow passes and not rush the cuts because that will be important. To create the checkerboard effect, we slide each piece up and down to alternate the pattern. With our final strips created, it's time for a light sand to remove the excess glue. I've not gone too ambitious with this first effort, but perhaps on later attempts I'll work with making more acute angles, diamond shape patterns, other unique shapes, things like that. However, for a first attempt at this, I think they've come out pretty good and should make some interesting coasters still. So back to the table saw again to trim the coasters to final size. The dimensions of these will be 100mm by 100mm. To make these easier to cut, I set up a stop block on my crosscut sled, and this will ensure that each one will come out exactly the same. If you're interested in seeing how I made this sled, you can check out my video that covers the process. With the coasters now cut to final size, we move over to the router table to round over the edges. The router left a few burn marks on some of the coasters, so we'll remove those over at the belt sander. Then it's on to final sanding. We start with 120 grit and we'll work our way up to 240. The finish I'm using is a simple wipe-on liquid wax. I've never used this before, but I wanted something that would keep the ply looking fairly natural, so we'll see if this one does the trick. I applied 2 coats of the wax and the end result I think looks pretty good. I love the texture and colours of the ply in these, and I'm really liking the contrast between the different patterns. Now that the coasters are done, it's time to move on to making the coaster holder. I'm going to be using scraps of pine from a previous project that will need to be glued into larger panels in order to give us enough width to work with. Then it's back to the table saw once again to trim and cut to final size. With the 4 sides now cut, we can now do the same for the base. I need to cut a hole through all 4 sides. This will create the gap to allow the coasters to be removed from the holder. Rather than cut 4 single holes, I'll tape up the sides together and drill them all at the same time. I'll then remove the excess using the bandsaw. And to clean up the bandsaw marks, a little bit of sanding. I don't own a spindle sander, which would have come in handy here, but a bit of sandpaper wrapped around a dowel does the job just fine. I'm going to miter the joins of the box, and I thought I'd try achieving that using a 45-degree bevel cut router bit. I could do this on the table saw, but given that it's only thin material, I thought I'd give this technique a go instead. Before gluing up, I'll do a quick dry fit to make sure that all the components fit together nicely and that the miters are nice and square. Rubber bands make a great clamp to aid in this. I've never used the bevel bit to do this type of miter before, but as you can see, it actually does a really nice job of getting nice accurate 45-degree miters, so I'll definitely try and use this technique again in the future. And finally dry fitting the base, which is a nice snug fit. Off camera, I glued and clamped the box, again using rubber bands to hold it together and tape to secure the edges. To soften the look, I rounded over the edges on the router table. and finally giving the whole box a good sanding. And just like the coasters, I gave the box 2 coats of wax. Using nothing but scraps that were destined for the bin, these coasters were a fun project and a great introduction to making pattern ply. I learned quite a few new techniques that I will try and incorporate into future projects, but I think for now I'll settle for enjoying a nice cup of tea. Thanks for watching and see you on the next one.